Whenever there's a new companion in Doctor Who, there is always going to be an episode where the companion kind of has to prove themselves. This is the one for Amy Pond. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kevin, I'm a geek. You are watching Kevin the Geek. And today I'm continuing with my New Who Doctor Who review. This is Series 5, it is episode number 2, and it is The Beast Below. Please feel free to go back and check out all of my other previous Doctor Who related content. I've done reviews, reactions, and of course rankings as well, which you can check everything out on the channel.
29th century, solar flares roast the Earth, and the entire human race packs its bags and moves out till the weather improves.
Now, at first glance, this episode doesn't really feel, to a certain degree, that it's really anything new, because it is the typical episode where a companion has to kind of prove themselves by dealing with a situation, and if the Doctor approves by the way that they pass that test, then ultimately they're allowed to travel alongside him on a full-term basis. And we've only ever really had one example within New Doctor Who where there is someone who ultimately fails that test, which was Adam back in the episode The Long Game, all the way back in Series 1. You can check that review out if you want to, or maybe not, because it is arguably considered one of the worst ever episodes of Doctor Who. But hey, you may want to see my point of view on that. But Adam did ultimately fail the test because he is selfish. He was basically only out to see what he could gain out of it under the guise of doing things to kind of better himself and the human race and so on and so forth.
I only take the best. I've got roles.
Whereas here, Amy goes out of her way to understand the Doctor in the way that he doesn't necessarily always understand himself. And the closest one you could argue that this kind of had a similarity to would be with Donna Noble in her first appearance in Doctor Who in The Runaway Bride, you know, where she had to stop the Doctor from going too far. And this was very similar to that, but I don't know whether this kind of had the same impact. And I feel that this episode does rehash a lot of the trends that Russell T Davies did in his initial era. You know, we have kind of the second episode of the season being a let's take the companion to the far future and let's show them the wonders of this. You know, you basically had it in series 1 with The End of the World, you had it in series 2 with New Earth, and then of course it was the third episode for series 3 and series 4 with, you know, Gridlock, and of course with Planet of the Ood. Now, the very first episode of this series with the 11th Hour, it really showed what Matt Smith was potentially going to be like as the Doctor. This is the one which, for him, was also a bit of a trial, because you need to see whether he's going to be able to do so on a consistent basis. I will say for the large proportion of this episode, it did. It built on the character that we were introduced to in the first episode, and you saw a lot of the compassion and the empathy that he has. But also, you start to see a little bit more of the darker side of him. And I have said on a number of occasions that it could be argued that this version of the Doctor, the 11th Doctor, is arguably the darkest and most angriest Doctor that we've probably had on the show, at least in modern Who. Obviously, I can't necessarily speak too much for the classic Who era. That is something I'm still trying to work my way through. And at the time of me recording this video, I am currently doing my next reaction for classic Doctor Who, which was the second serial, The Daleks. So make sure you do stay around for the channel for that when I eventually release all my reactions for those episodes. But here, I like the scene towards the end when they're down in the Tower of London and they have basically, well, at least the Doctor has worked out what is happening. Because all the way through that scene, you can see that sort of bubbling, kind of simmering nature of anger as what the humans are doing to the star whale, who's the, I don't know, the villain of the episode. It's not really, but I'll get to the villain in a moment. But throughout that scene, he builds and builds and builds to the point where he has this outright release of anger, particularly towards Amy as well. And I like the way that they go with it. Some people could argue that it's not necessarily the best portrayal of anger, and Matt Smith, it has been noted by people that he is a shouty, angry person. He doesn't really do the kind of darker, deeper, simmering kind of anger in the way that Christopher Eccleston did so brilliantly, particularly in the episode Dalek, all the way back in Series 1. He is a shouty, angry person, and you definitely see it in the next episode as well, which, of course, you would need to stick around for next week. And my opinions on the controversial rainbow Daleks, as some people call them, or the Teletubby Daleks. But for this story, I think it worked, because there was enough of that underlying simmer before you suddenly went up into the deep kind of really outburst of anger. If he had just gone straight from 0 to 100, it wouldn't have worked. But because you felt that simmering energy throughout that scene, I think it necessarily worked.
We've increased speed.
Yeah, well, you've stopped torturing the pilot. Gotta help.
Now, with Amy and her trial, I like the fact that she questions the Doctor. And the best companions do test and question the Doctor and his morals. But the even better ones are the ones that understand him. And it's clear that Amy looks and listens and responds to what the Doctor says, and also the stuff that he doesn't say. You know, he is very reserved in this story, particularly at the moment when he is asked about if he was ever a parent himself. He can't quite bring himself to answer that question.
I mean, children cry because they want attention, because they're hurt or afraid. When they cry silently, it's because they just can't stop. Any parent knows that.
Are you a parent?
So I think the fact that Amy understands him so well at this early point is a testament to the writing, because when you think about it, this is not day 2 of Amy meeting the Doctor. For her, this is, 14 years down the line. And okay, in theory, she has only spent time with the Doctor himself for, maybe an hour, 2, 3 hours at most. But in her mind, she has had conversations with the Doctor for 14 years. She met that raggedy Doctor, and she's probably had all these different questions, all these different thought processes for such a long period of time. Okay, she would have had to kind of wipe a lot of it out of her memory when she tried to say, no, he was just imaginary, he wasn't actually real. But for her, it is still that 7-year-old girl who is going on this adventure. Yes, it is, of course, adult Amy, but in her mind, she's being brought back to that fairy tale aspect of it. And so she is trying to understand this mythical being that is suddenly in front of her. And although she's had all these different thoughts and theories about the Doctor, this is her experiencing him properly for the first time. And I think the way that they did it was really good. There was a few iffy moments to the story as a whole. It does feel very much of a sort of a social commentary kind of episode. And because of that with the story, like, I love the setting that they do. And like, you look at this sort of market scene that they do and how it is very quintessentially British. even like the lifts having like the sort of logo for the underground. Yeah, I liked it, but then when you think about it in the context that this feels like it is a bit of a political statement of an episode, it is argued then, is it a little bit too on the nose? Is it a little bit too heavy-handed at times? You could definitely argue it. Because really the villains of the piece are the human race. And some people could argue that this kind of commentary on the star whale, it's the sort of commentary on enslaving animals and abusing animals and using them for the purposes of entertainment. In reality, I don't think it quite goes that far, but I have spoken to people in the past who does feel that it's kind of going down that line. And if you talk about it in the modern day, again, you could maybe argue that it's kind of this kind of subtle commentary on like veganism and things like that. Again, for me personally, I don't necessarily feel that it is quite going to those lengths, but it is definitely something that you could argue is trying to hammer home a point rather than necessarily doing an overall good story. And I do feel that it does a reasonably good story, but it does feel a little bit heavy-handed in its approach at times. And it's got to be said, with Liz 10, the Queen of Britain, like, she's a difficult character to understand because it just feels a bit weird. And I've seen some people describe her as being one of the best parts of this episode. I personally don't agree. Now, I have kind of seen Sophie Okonedo on the channel before, but rather here, because she was in the Doctor Who, what was it, the 40th? Yeah, the 40th anniversary, which was the animated kind of thing, the Scream of the Shouker, which eventually kind of became this unofficial kind of non-canon product. But she played the character, the companion in that. I can't even remember the character's name, I'll be completely honest with you. But I did direction on the channel for November for the 60th anniversary kind of month, so go back and check that one out as well. But in this, she was okay, but I didn't necessarily like this whole kind of action hero-y kind of thing that they were going for with her. And I understand that they're going down this route of trying to show that the royal family can evolve and modernize themselves, which is definitely a thing that we are seeing, with the passing of, Her Majesty the Queen Liz II last year. We're obviously in this sort of transitional period where there was obviously a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily want Charles to be king, and they would have preferred it to have gone straight to William. But I do feel that King Charles is showing that he is a little bit more modern in his thinking, despite being of a much older generation. But I think a lot of people would just have preferred William to just go straight in being king himself. I'm not going to get into a political debate about the royal family. That's not what I do here on the channel. But I think that's what they were trying to do, is to show that the royal family can become a little bit more modern. But the way that they portrayed it, with her with a Cockney accent and being kind of like a Lara Croft in a way, and the whole
I'm the bloody queen, mate. Basically, I rule.
I just wasn't a fan of that. I remember the first time I saw it, I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. But the more I think about it, it's a bit cringy, a bit cheesy. So yeah, the villains of the piece, it's a bit all over the place, really. At one point you're supposed to think that it's the star whale. At another point, you're supposed to think it's these smilers / winders, and then ultimately it's basically the human race as a whole. Technically it's Liz 10 herself and things. It was very much all over the place. At least the smilers, they were suitably creepy enough. They had a physical presence and they made you feel a little bit at unease. But then you added in the winders.
Why do the winders become smilers? Because I think when I'm watching Doctor Who, I'm aching for that to happen. I want that head revolve to happen, an unexpected moment, and for you to realise that someone who just looked human is actually sinister and terrible. That must happen in Doctor Who. It's an absolute rule.
I will say that the special effects for them was pretty good, particularly when you realise that it was actually kind of a practical effect. You know, the guy who was playing him, he literally had painted onto the back of his head the angry smiler face, and then they used a bit of green screen. He was like sat on a stool, and they did it to do the rotation. I thought that looked pretty good. You know, the way that they did that. I like it when you do practical special effects more so than doing CGI based stuff, because like again, you look at the Star Whale, it's a bit meh. I mean, if I'd been doing it personally, I would have liked to have done a link back to the episode of Torchwood Meat, which had this, what they called in it, their cash cow. I think that would have been nice if that had been like a little link there, because it was effectively a similar kind of thing. It was this big beastie kind of thing, you know. But yeah, it would have just been nice to do that. But that's me and my personal, like to link everything together. You may disagree with that. But overall, I think the episode, it was fun. It was a little bit thought-provoking. And the dynamic between the Doctor and Amy really worked. And they took it to the next level. And, of course, we will see how that progresses in the future. But what I do with all of my Doctor Who reviews is I score each one out of 100 by giving 10 categories a score out of 10. And I use that to be able to really break down the nitty-gritties of each episode to be able to help me when I eventually do rankings for it. I did a ranking for the entirety of the Russell T Davies era, and I will do another one for the entirety of the Stephen Moffat era, and then there'll probably be a follow-up, which is combining both of them. And then I'll do each one for like the Chibnall era and so on and so forth as well. But let's check out this week's scores for The Beast Below. And so there you have it. This episode has scored 67 marks out of 100, which means on my ranking scale, it is a B- episode. It is slightly above average. Probably about C+. Is about the sort of average kind of episode. That's just kind of there. It's a bit forgettable at times. B- is probably when it starts to get into, slightly better, quality, a little bit more above average. And it is hard, because you could look at some that have scores at a similar level to this, like Dalek. Everybody I've really ever spoken to has a very good opinion of the episode Dalek, the one from the series 1 with Christopher Eccleston. But it's, when you balance out the whole story as a whole, like the Doctor and the Dalek in that was absolutely amazing. But when you have really bad supporting cast, it kind of pulls it down a bit. And so this is what I think is a fair way of being able to score these episodes. You let me know if you have your own scoring system and what you would score this one. But that is what I've given The Beast Below. Now, make sure you join me next week. Like I said before, we have got the controversial episode Victory of the Daleks, more so for the Skittle Daleks, or the Rainbow Daleks, or the Teletubby Daleks, as people have kind of called them over the years. But check out my review of whether I think it's a win or a woeful episode. So, for now, my name's Kevin. I'm a geek, and you've been watching Kevin the Geek. Goodbye.